Hey everyone, this is Peter Zablocki, the host of the Daily History Shorts podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. If this is your first time stopping by, I hope you stick around and return tomorrow for more fun history. And if you enjoy these Friday conversation series, you can always find the entire backlog of conversations with historians, authors, Pulitzer Prize winners, and much more under the Conversations tab on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Today's conversation is proudly brought to you by The Collector, your destination for captivating stories that teach, inform, and inspire millions of readers every day. From ancient history to today's defining moments, from philosophy and art to exclusive interviews, discover more at thecollector.com. Today's guest has a knack for telling forgotten history, someone who digs deep into the past to uncover the surprising, the strange, and the all too relevant. Matthew Algeo is an award-winning journalist and acclaimed author whose books breathe life into some of America's most overlooked yet fascinating chapters. From the time Harry Truman took a road trip as an ex-president to the tale of the 1904 Olympic Marathon, arguably the most bizarre sporting event in history. His latest work, New York's Secret Subway, the underground genius of Alfred Beach and the origins of mass transit, tells the riveting story of a man with a radical idea, a subway built in secrecy beneath the streets of Manhattan in the 1860s. It is a tale of ingenuity, political resistance, and what happens when visionary dreams clash with corrupt power. Matthew, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Peter. It's great to be here.
So what was the impetus for writing this story? Did you have this moment when you were like, oh, I should write about this? And then once you got to doing it, is there anything that surprised you the most? Any detail that you uncovered that during this research that kind of changed your perception of this time period?
Yeah, I get asked a lot, how did you come up with the idea? Where did you hear it? And usually it's just sort of amorphous back there somewhere. But this one, I had a definite aha moment, and it was during the pandemic in 2020. And I was on binging songs on Spotify, and I'm a fan of 70s classic rock and prog rock. And there was a playlist, and there was a song on there. They were by a Canadian group called Klaatu. Klaatu had some success in the 70s. They wrote a song called Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft, which the Carpenters then covered and had a top 40 hit. But the original Klaatu version was on this album, and I went and listened to this album that was suggested to me. And there's a song on there called Sub Rosa Subway, and it is about Alfred Beach building the secret pneumatic subway in 1870. And back in 1870, I mean, it was such a cool song. And the story to me was unbelievable. But of course, a quick Google search showed that it was true that Alfred Beach was this kind of mad scientist inventor who secretly built a little pneumatic tube subway in New York to prove the concept. And he did it in the middle of the night, digging the tunnel underground. And so it just really spun off from there. So it all began in the summer of 2020.
Yeah, you do mention even in the preface of your book, you say that this sounds like something out of the H.G. Wells novel, right? Like this whole story is so
Yeah.
implausible.
Yeah, it does. It's like a Jules Verne kind of thing, and he's working underground at night to secretly dig this tunnel. You're asking, what was one of the things that surprised me? Well, the main thing that surprised me was the fact that he was able to do this, that he surreptitiously dug a tunnel under Broadway. Now, he had a great cover story. He said he was just building a small tube to send packages back and forth, but he actually was building an 8-foot wide tunnel that was like 300 feet long for his pneumatic tube subway. And of course, it all had to be done in secret because Boss Tweed was the political boss in New York at the time, and he was basically in the back pocket of the streetcar, the horse car companies. who had a monopoly on public transportation. And so they opposed anything, any innovation that would improve public transportation. And so that's why Beach knew he could never do it out in the open. So he had to do it secretly.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue because my second question deals with the fact of what spurred him on to do this, right? You said he's kind of like this math scientist, right? But like, what was his impetus? And then once he started with this vision of mass transit, how did that contrast with the city's political and business elite, right? You kind of alluded to it here, but this was a struggle. It's an ongoing struggle for him to try to get past the politics and the business aspect of it.
Yeah, so Alfred Beach lived for a time, he lived in Brooklyn and took the ferry over to New York. So he was a commuter. I mean, New York was really the first commuter city in America where people, had to travel distances to get from their home to work, especially as the city grew. And then Alfred moved into the city, but it would take him as long as an hour to get to the office, which is only a few blocks away. It's hard for us to comprehend. The streets were so incredibly crowded in New York, especially during the day. Vendors, pedestrians, of course, everything's horse drawn. There's horses everywhere. It's a mess. The horses are pooping everywhere. And so Alfred, in his mind, wanted to invent something to fix this. And this was really kind of the golden age of American invention, right? Like any problem can be solved with an invention. And Albert was convinced that the best way to solve this problem of transportation in New York City was to build something underground. Now, his first idea was just to build a tunnel underground that horses would pull carriages back and forth. But then in the 1860s, there were experiments conducted in England that he heard of. And I should mention, Albert was the editor of Scientific American magazine. So he knew all that was going on in American invention and British invention. And he heard about these experiments in pneumatic tubes. And it occurred to him that that might be a way to move people underground in New York. Get a big fan, put a car on rails, the fan blows the car to the next station. I mean, it's a pretty simple solution. And it had the benefit of not using steam engines, which pollute the tunnel terribly. London had an underground subway, an underground railroad beginning. It opened in 1863, but they used steam engines, so the tunnels were filled with smoke and cinders and soot. It was not a pleasant atmosphere. And so by using pneumatic tubes and pneumatic power, he wouldn't have that problem. And it also wouldn't have the problem of the horse poop, which was a huge pollution problem. The problem he had was getting permission to do it. And that's where the problem with Boss Tweed came in. And we see this today. I mean, any new idea, any revolutionary idea is going to shake up one industry or another. And of course, that will have an effect on the politicians who are, supported, who get what would be the word for that? Where you donate money to a politician and
Yeah.
you expect them to look out for your interests. I mean, lobbying. So Beach knew that Tweed would never go for this idea of building an underground railroad because Tweed himself was on the board of one of the streetcar companies, right? And the streetcar companies paid a kickback to Tweed and his cronies to make sure there were no competitors. And so that's why Beach decided he had to do this all in secret, basically.
How did he fund it?
That's a good question. A lot of it came right out of his own pocket. My own figuring, I was able to track down a couple of his descendants, I think it's great times three
Oh,
grandchildren.
wow.
And I got a copy of his will. He died. My best guess is that he spent about $300,000 of his own money
Back
on this
then.
project back
Wow.
then.
Wow.
So that would be millions today. About
Yeah.
half his fortune went into this. His brother, who was also wealthy, their father had owned the New York Sun, a very lucrative newspaper, a penny paper that became very popular in the 1840s and 1850s. So the family was quite well off. But Beach sunk about half his fortune into this. He had some outside investors, but all the money was private money from investors who were willing to spend the money to build what was essentially a prototype. This was only a block long subway that he was going to build, unveil it to the world, show how good it is, and then the public acclaim would force Boss Tweed to give him permission to run it the length of the island. And so he only needed enough money to build this, and it still ended up costing him about $300,000. And I have to say, like the descendants I found, both of them still rue this decision that their great 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 grandfather made to spend half his fortune was
Oh
wiped
man.
out
Oh man.
150 years ago. They still think about that. But yeah, most of it was finance. He financed it himself.
Wow. Yeah, I was kind of curious. Are they like proud of the fact, like, oh yeah, 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 when you sought them out, where these guys are like, thank you, finally someone's coming to talk to us about this.
Yeah, actually, yeah. They are very proud of him, and he's kind of one of these forgotten figures in American history. Look, it's not a spoiler to say there was not a pneumatic tube subway built the length of Manhattan in
Yes.
1870. It didn't happen. He came close, and it might have happened if things had fallen his way. But I think his descendants, and there are many now, are very proud of this ancestor of theirs who they were happy that I was working on the project to give him some recognition, I'd say.
So perfect segue again. I guess my next question is talks about the failure itself, right? So why wasn't this, or why did this, I guess, his vision not become reality? And also, do you think that the fact that it didn't delayed America's adoption of the underground transit system?
It failed. I would say three reasons that it failed. One was financial. One was technical, and one was psychological. The psychological hurdle was getting people to accept the fact that they would go underground and travel in darkness. Basically, this was a huge deal. I mean, people, the underground was associated with the nether, was associated with death, right? I mean, it was associated with hell. It was associated with demons. The idea of people traveling underground in tubes, opaque tubes, they couldn't see anything. I think people were reluctant to travel that way. Now, I think he could have overcome that, and obviously we have. The next problem was technical. There were problems with how you would be able to propel the cars over long distances using these giant fans, and I think it would have been very expensive. But the main reason it failed was financial. Even when he won a charter to build the pneumatic tube the length of Manhattan, it wasn't until 1873. And then you know as well as I do, what kills dreams? What 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 kills financial, economic, business dreams in the 1800s? It's the panic. There's always a panic that
It's
comes
always a
along.
panic. That's right.
Always a panic. And
70s,
so
90s, it's around the
right,
corner.
every 10 years you had a
Yeah.
panic. Well, in 1873, it was Jay Gould tried to corner the market on gold. Long story short, it didn't happen, but it tanked the financial markets. And all of a sudden, there was no credit to be had. At the same time, all of Boss Tweed's shenanigans were exposed, his corruption and how much he had stolen from the public treasury. And so there wasn't a lot of interest, a lot of enthusiasm for investing money in this weird scheme to build a pneumatic tube underground to carry people in the city that was basically the world capital of corruption at the time. And so he gets the charter to build it in, I think, January, March of 1873. And it's just a couple months later that the financial panic hits. And so he was not able to raise money to expand the line at all. And they ended up turning the tunnel. I think he rented it for a shooting gallery for a while. So those were the major obstacles to him completing this. Now, the other question is a good question. You know, did it impact the building of transit or mass transportation, especially in New York? It definitely delayed the construction of subways in New York. And what happened was, after this plan failed, there was a small elevated railroad line that went up Greenwich Street. And finally, people threw up their arms and said, let's just build elevated railroads. It's the easiest to do. You don't have to dig tunnels. They're loud, they're messy. Nobody really liked them. But as a practical matter, they were relatively easy to build. And that's what happened. People A lot of people, even New Yorkers, don't realize Manhattan was covered with elevated railroads really until the 1920s. And then when the subway construction began around 1903, I believe is when it began, then finally the subways replaced the elevated railroads. But man, it was covered with elevated railroads. The other thing, and I'm going on too long, but I just want to
No,
say
you're not. No, go,
the
go, go.
the the electric motor was invented in the 1880s, and this made it possible to power subway cars without horses and without steam, which were the two great advantages that pneumatic power had. But electric power was much simpler. And so that made it that obviated the usefulness of pneumatic power. You wouldn't need pneumatic power tubes anymore because you have electric power. And Siemens, the great inventor in Germany, came up with the ingenious idea to run the power through one of the rails, run the electricity through one of the rails. So when the train is in contact with the rail, you can carry the current up to the motor, run the motor, and that just made it. That revolutionized transportation, urban mass transportation, and that then all of the subways built in New York were powered by electric motors.
I mean, it just proves the fact that Beach was ahead of his time,
Yeah, he
right?
really was. I mean, he knew where the future was. He just didn't. Sometimes I say he was in the right stadium but playing the wrong sport, right?
Mm.
And if he had come along 20 years later and seen what Siemens was doing in Germany with electric motors, I'm sure he would have adopted that. He wasn't he wasn't he didn't adore pneumatic power. There were guys that did. There was a guy named Medhurst in England who just thought, the whole country should be crisscrossed with tunnels. What Beach saw was that it was so much better than the alternative, which was the horse cars pulling these wagons on the street, and I can't. I mean, I'm not being scatological. The horse poop thing was huge. I mean, you were talking tons of manure that were dropped on the streets every day, just crossing the street. Um, you were risking your health, basically. This was great disease vectors. These were great disease vectors, these piles of manure. And there wasn't a lot of sanitation at the time. And so it was a very visible problem to Beach, and he knew that this was one way to solve it.
We take so much for granted. Just the fact that a garbage truck will come and pick up our
Yep.
garbage, right? Or
Yep.
mail. I mean, having to, go to the whoever owned the store in town to get your mail, right? I mean, we take
Right.
a lot of things for granted today.
Yeah, and it's interesting. My wife is a retired Foreign Service officer, so we lived all over the world. And in most of the world, there is no mail delivery. And in a lot of the world, there aren't even addresses, right? I mean, we lived in West Africa and Mali. There's no address. I mean, so a lot of the things that we take for granted today, even today, the rest of the world uh, doesn't enjoy, and definitely transportation. I mean, a lot of the world just uses minibuses, minivans that are just packed with people, and it's so dangerous. We have the advantage and the luxury of really of having had these systems built sometimes 100 years ago, 150 years ago. The test for us now, or the challenge for us now, is to maintain these systems and keep them running. But yeah, it blows your mind when you think about what life was like 150 years ago. I mean, even Beach, as part of his kind of public relations campaign to make this subway attractive, he built a waiting room, uh, basically a subway station, but he made it blended. It had a grand piano, and he had a fountain with goldfish, and he had a ladies' waiting room. All these things to make it appeal to people, especially kind of middle class, upper class people in New York at the time. But there were no electric lights, didn't have electricity yet, so it's all
Yeah.
gas lit, and he had to have huge glass blocks in the sidewalk above it so light could come in. And it's just, again, and I'm sure you encounter it all the time when you're doing research or doing work, you go, oh, that's right, they did not have electric lights.
Yes.
And like the indoor lighting was very poor and uneven, and that's just how people lived.
Yeah, no, it's the ability to place yourself in that time period and context. I had Joseph Ellis on my show,
Sure.
and he said, he goes, history speaks a foreign language. You almost have to
Right.
put yourself in it. You know what I mean? You have to learn it of what it was
Yeah.
like back then. Don't,
Yeah.
yeah, don't, you could interpret it later if you want, but first you have to learn that language. You have to learn what it was like at the time you're writing about.
That's a great quote. I'm going to steal that. But
Yeah.
I feel sometimes like I should dress up how they dressed up for a day while I'm working on this. Because even that, the women wore these cumbersome, they were still wearing the, I forget, one of the characters in the story is a guy named Stewart, A.T. Stewart, and he owned the big department store in New York. Still one of the richest Americans who ever lived. It's insane. Adjusted for inflation, he's like the seventh or eighth richest American who ever lived. He had all these innovations in department stores, yada, yada, yada. He owned a huge department store on Broadway and did not want anything to interfere with that. Didn't want a subway because it would take people off the street. And so that would hurt his business, he believed. So the reason he got so rich is because the change of fashion after the Civil War, the fashion became that women started wearing so much more clothes, so many layers with petticoats and undergarments, that the amount of fabric it took to dress the average woman from 1850 to 1900, it's like sevenfold it increased. And this is how he saw this, and then he became an importer. He made his own clothes, vertical integration, all that. So he figured that out. But yeah, it just goes to show how much things can change and how quickly they can change. And I do think it would be fun to, like, the men all wore these high collar shirts. It just looked so uncomfortable. And they all wore tall hats at the time, too. A lot of silk hats. And of course, you always wore a heavy overcoat. A lot of this was because you would get so dirty outside walking in the streets. So you had long coats so they would cover your pants legs. So when you came in, your pants would be clean. Yeah,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, no, but interesting side note. I love that because I always, every time I watch like 40s, 30s, 40s, early 50s movies, men are always dressed so sharp. And I love the hat. Like we need to bring back the
yeah,
hat. The baseball cap took over the hat, but
yeah.
right?
If you look at pictures of sporting events from 50 or 60 years ago, everybody's well dressed and nobody's wearing the gear.
Yeah.
You look at a picture of a Yankees game from the 50s, nobody's wearing a Yankees jersey, nobody's
Yeah.
wearing a Yankees ball cap. And everything gets monetized, I guess. I guess that's what
Ugh,
happens inevitably.
nuts. I guess my last question. So this was very covert. This whole process was covert. Do you think something similar, feat of stealth engineering could happen in today's world?
It's probably happening in some aspects of innovation and invention. I mean, we still have corporate secrets, right? But the idea of a major public works project, I think that would be tough. It's funny, at the same time that Beach was building his pneumatic subway underground, the Brooklyn Bridge construction had just begun. And of course, Tweed and his cronies all got in on the action there. But you can't build a bridge in secret, right? I mean, there was a practical advantage that Beach had, is that he was working underground the whole time. So he rented out the basement of this clothing store. And like I said, he had a cover story that he was just building a small tube. So I think it would depend on what the project was, but huge infrastructure projects now cost exponentially so much more than they cost back then for a variety of reasons. But to even do something like this privately, like Beach did, right, using his own money, would be almost impossible, even if you
Yeah.
did, and even if you wanted to do it in secret somehow. It just, the cost, the scale of it is just so huge now. And I guess we were lucky. The guys who were digging the tunnel for Beach were making, I think, $1.50 a day, which is not that bad,
Yeah.
for Irish immigrants to come in. Um, but the costs now are just so much more, so much bigger, and the equipment you need is so much bigger. Beach actually invented a little drilling shield, a tunneling shield, he called it, for this tunnel, which was about 8 feet wide, the width of the tunnel, and it was round. And the guys could dig out the front and then take it out the back. It was covered. And we still use this basic design for these massive tunnels that we build now. But you've seen these tunnel boring machines now. They're as big as a house,
Yes.
right? You're not doing that. It's, and they cost $1 bazillion. So it would be hard, I think, to do something like this on this scale, just because of the money involved.
Yeah. No, this was a fascinating book to read. It's a fascinating topic, and I think that hopefully this will bring him back to the conversation, right?
Peter, I think it would make an excellent movie or miniseries. That's just my
Yeah,
unbiased opinion. But no, it really is it's really one of my favorite periods of history. Is really between the Civil War and World War One, that Gilded Age, Victorian period. It kind of gets overlooked. We've got the Civil War, and then Teddy Roosevelt becomes president, and then World War One. It's just that sort of, the bearded president's era,
yeah.
and there's so many stories. I mean, there's so many stories in history, but in American history, and especially that period of history, it's just really there's a lot of material there. It's a great period. Now, it wasn't great for everybody, and it wasn't easy for everybody, but the stories are amazing.
Matt, I always
Yeah.
ask this question. You think of a bookcase in your house that you've had your whole life since you were little to now. And
Mhm.
what would be two books? It doesn't have to be obviously nonfiction, just it's because it's from your childhood to now. What would be two books I would definitely find on that bookshelf?
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl, a book I got when I was 8 and read and read and read and still read it. And I would say In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, the true crime book about the murders in Holcomb, Kansas, in I think it was 1957. Um, yeah, those are two
They'll,
books I've read a lot. I've
they'll
read
be
a
on there.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Do you ever find yourself like when you write and you get stuck and you're like you just walk up to your bookshelves and just pick up a book that you love and just open it up, read a page? I find myself doing that sometimes.
It's dangerous though, because then I worry. I do it, but you have to be careful that you go sit down and start writing that book.
Yes.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
it's like The Power Broker, which is a book I've tried to read many times, but it's there's so much good stuff in there that I worry. I'm like, am I going to like secretly absorb this and then get busted for plagiarizing Robert Caro? But
I
so
love
far, it
that.
hasn't happened. Yeah.
So what are you working on next? What's the plan? I mean, right now you're in the midst of obviously talking about this book, but do you have your eyes set on anything?
I don't really. I don't have any big projects underway. We recently moved. I live in Lawrence, Kansas now. I'm working at Kansas Public Radio. I'm the morning edition host there, and I also do some reporting. So it's been kind of nice to do. We were talking earlier. I don't know whether you're even taping, but about there are all these ideas for stories you have, and they're not all going to be books, right? Well, it's kind of nice. I'm working on a lot of little stories right now. I just did a story about a piglet who fell off the back of a transport truck and got adopted by a humane society, right? Those kinds of things. You're not going to
Nice.
write a book about that, but
Yeah, yeah,
there's a lot of little stories out there. So I'm kind of working on that right now. I'm sure a big story will come along. You know how it is. And
yeah.
I always say it's like dating somebody, it's like you really, really have to like them,
Yes.
to say, I'm going to take you to the prom and eventually like, I'm going to marry you. That's how it is with a book idea.
Yeah.
Sometimes you
No,
really have to like
yeah.
it.
I've written like 50,000 words and then put it away. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it just fizzled out. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating, but it's better than putting out a crappy book,
Right.
So you get there and you're like, no, I just, when you all of a sudden you're not excited to get to that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's days, obviously, there are days when you're like, okay, I got to put my ass in this seat and I'm just going to do
Mhm.
this
Yeah.
because I have to do it. But when that happens a lot with a story, you're like, I lost it. It's done.
Right. Yeah. If you don't want to do the work anymore, and if it's not fun, I have the same attitude about reading books. I'm like, if I'm not enjoying the book, I'll stop reading the book. My wife
Yeah.
has to finish the book. She starts a book, she's going to finish it to the end. But I'm like, if I'm not enjoying it, I'll stop doing it. And that's the beauty of writing books. Usually you're writing stories, the old axiom, write the book you want to read. And then
Yeah.
sometimes you'll realize, man, I guess I didn't want to read that book.
There's not many books I walked away from. One is considered one of the greatest American Westerns of all time, and I just couldn't finish it. I almost don't want to say it. Did you ever read
What?
Blood Meridian?
No,
Okay. I
no.
mean,
I don't think
Lonesome
I,
Dove. I love Lonesome Dove. I'm like, you know what? Someone said, if you're going to read a Western, read this one. I'm like, all right, I guess if I'm going to read a Western, I'll read the Pulitzer Prize winning one. And I loved it. And I'm like, all right. And then someone's like, well, you gotta read Blood Meridian. And I was like, all right. And I went from
Is that
Lonesome Dove to that, and I couldn't finish it.
is Blood Meridian? Is that a novel? Is it a Larry
It's a
McMurtry book?
yeah, it's not a McMurtry
Yeah.
book, but it's a
Uh,
novel. And it's
uh,
supposed to be one of like the greatest. Oh my god, who
okay.
wrote it? I forgot now. It slips my mind, but it was one of the greatest Western novels. And I just, everyone's like, "You read this one,
I
right?" I'm like, "No, I
I don't
tried."
read I don't read a lot of fiction. Do you read a lot of fiction?
I tried to alternate. I force myself to alternate, which is weird that you say that because your books read in a very narrative style the way you write. So I would think you would read a lot of fiction.
Yeah, I just there's so many great stories out there, and I've read some of the classic fiction, but I don't know. There are just so many interesting stories in this world that
That happened.
I want to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah, the
actually
real
happened.
ones. I'm not
Yeah.
busting on fiction. It's hard to
Yeah.
write fiction. It's way harder to write
Oh,
fiction, I think.
I could never
Yeah,
having the freedom to invent and make stuff up. I would get lost. At least if you write nonfiction, it's very linear. Like I
yeah,
have perimeters. This is what happened. This is what I'm going to talk about. If I
right.
could
And
go anywhere, oh,
you
forget it.
don't. I don't have the imagination for it. I just don't.
Yeah.
I love assembling the pieces and putting them together in a logical way, and hopefully it'll, smooth way guide readers from this to that. But as far as making stuff up, my wife is from Mississippi, and we went to see the Faulkner House in Oxford, and his walls are just covered with the towns he made up in his mind for the settings for his books. He would just draw on the wall, and the streets are named, and the kind of
Wow.
trees that were lining the streets. He's decided in this town he's made up in his head, and I was like, I couldn't do
Yeah. No way. No, that's
that.
work in itself. That's
Yeah,
forget the
yeah,
book. By the time I was done with that, I'd be like, well, that's it.
yep.
I'm moving on.
I've done all I'm going to do.
This is awesome, Matt. Where can my listeners go to read about your work and kind of see what you're up to next?
I have a website. It is malgeo.net, Malgeo, or you can just Google my name. It'll come up.
This
Great.
was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
You're welcome, Peter. I really enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun.